Our talk title this morning is Who is Ernest Holmes? Impressions of Emerson. So we are talking about the ideas that Emerson brought to Ernest Holmes and how they apply in the science of mind. Ernest's brother William was a psychology student at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. He had written on metaphysical subjects, and it was while Ernest was visiting his brother that he discovered Ralph Waldo Emerson's essays. His brother Fenwick said that his readings were the moment life began for Ernest. So the seeds were planted within Ernest Holmes for what would become the science of mind. Ernest just loved the nonconformity and independence he found in the writings of Emerson. He loved the idea of be yourself. And I think those words are really important for each one of us today too. Be yourself. The idea that we need to have faith and trust in our own interpretation of whatever we read, whatever's going on, whatever we hear, and whatever we think. Trust our own interpretation. Holmes was just 20 years old, and he reveled in his newfound spiritual freedom. Can you just imagine being 20 years old and being that secure in your spiritual freedom, that secure in your knowing and your life's purpose and your God? So Holmes determined that he would not be afraid to recognize and put to use his inner genius. And he decided right then and there that that would be what his life's work would be, that he would help others to bring out their inner genius. Indeed, I'd say he has accomplished that, and he continues to. Holmes followed his own ideas, his own interpretation of ideas, and yet at the same time he was tolerant of everybody else's opinions and beliefs, regardless of whether they differed from his or not. He once wrote, "Every man becomes his own philosophy, his own institution, and what he has is conditioned by what he is. You are married to your soul, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, for life and death, now and forever." And sometimes that thought frightened me. He wrote, "I didn't always like myself, but I couldn't get a divorce." Very relatable, yes? There are moments in our humanity that we don't like the way we're showing up. And that was true for him too. He began to understand the true meaning of the soul as he read Emerson's essay on spiritual laws. And according to the Science of Mind archives, Holmes embodied 3 ideas for Emerson that he carried into, with further study, his teaching of the science of mind. The first one, we are our own spiritual authority. Second, there is a godlike essence in every person. And third, there is some kind of connection between our thoughts and what happens to us. All sounds familiar, doesn't it? Can't hear it enough, because then we go out and live life. And remembering these ideas is so valuable. And those 3 ideas, along with others, became what we know today as the science of mind and spirit. The idea had begun to move from an idea in the mind of God to an idea in the mind of Ernest Holmes.
I think it's interesting that my introduction into the basis of New Thought teaching also began, like Holmes, with Emerson. Long before I ever even heard the name Ernest Holmes, I was reading Emerson. Well, my quest for personal spiritual self-meaning evolved from a process of singing in various churches every week. Every week I would sing in a different church. And I had a vast exposure to various religions and doctrines. And so I felt like I had a pretty extensive understanding of what religion was about. I would sing Hebrew at the High Holy Days at the Jewish temple, and then I would sing midnight masses and Catholic masses at the Catholic Basilica. And every week I would sing a different church service at Unitarian, Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, Pentecostal, Episcopal, Presbyterian, Christian Science, Unity, and several others. Very rarely did I sing 2 weeks at the same church in a row. But I began to be kind of skeptical of all this religion that I was hearing. I was shocked that people were actually buying into what they were hearing every week. And some of the things I thought were just not logical in any way. And but then I began to listen more closely to determine what is it that I do believe. What do I believe? I could very easily say, well, I certainly don't believe that. But it's a little more of a challenge for me to come up with the idea of, okay, what do I believe? And I was immersed in a lot of possibilities. I could say I was in the realm of infinite possibilities at that time, before I was even into Science of Mind. Well, I started reading Emerson, and they gave me the courage to look within and determine what I actually did believe, and it also gave me validity of my thoughts and beliefs. Unity was in the teachings of Charles Fillmore, was the first time I found a teaching that I could actually say, well, I think these people believe the same thing that I do. And that's something we hear quite often from visitors here at Centers for Spiritual Living. They come in and they say, wow, I didn't know other people actually believe the same thing that I do. And I find that really liberating and exciting to hear other people say the same thing that I felt back in the day, and find a spirituality that actually agrees with my thoughts and beliefs. I was introduced to Emerson at Unity through a lecture that I heard, and I bought the book and started reading it immediately. And I kind of felt it was almost sacrilegious or blasphemous, according to the really strict Christian background that I had been brought up with. And it didn't really agree with humility and self-degradation and guilt and sinners and all that kind of stuff. But you know what? I kind of liked that. I was also singing quite a bit at the Christian Science Church, and I began to read Mary Baker Eddy's Science and Health. In the Christian Science Church, the soloist sits in a little room in the back, and you pop out like a little cuckoo clock, and you sing the solos and lead the hymns and stuff, then you go in the back and you sit through the whole service in this little back room. And there was a chair there and a little table, and they had Mary Baker Eddy's Science and Health. And I would just sit there and read the book every week. I thought it was fascinating, because I really agreed with a lot of it. And what really fascinated me was the new interpretation of the teachings of Jesus. They were not the same teachings that I grew up with, the same interpretation, but they were really powerful, and I really liked them. And then I found Science of Mind and Ernest Holmes, and it all made logical sense now, because everything was presented in a more scientific, philosophical way. And it was no longer mystical and mysterious and miraculous. It was actually logical. It was scientific, and it actually made sense. And I understood what Holmes meant when he said reading Emerson was like drinking water. Because reading Holmes, and then reading Troward, and then reading Emerson, all made a really powerful impression on me, because it's something that I could understand. And all of a sudden my spiritual life began to unfold. As Fenwick said about Ernest, for the first time it really kind of woke him up. Emerson said in all my lectures, I have taught one doctrine, namely, the infinitude of the private man. That's a powerful statement. He believed in the interconnection with God, and that we are not subject to God. We are God in expression. He rejected the idea that God was separate from our experience. God is not a separate entity. God is within us, and so we go within ourselves to find our truth. And I was thinking this morning that had I told my mother back in the day that I know that the full wisdom and power of the universe is within me, and I know exactly what is right for me to do, she probably would have slapped my face, but because I would have been blasphemous or something. But I believe, wow, that's exactly what Emerson talks about, and it is so powerful. He says, a man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards. Doesn't matter how famous or powerful you are or were at any time, that which is within you, easy for me to say, is more true for you than all the most inspirational speakers of the world. What I was reading and hearing from others did not resonate with my personal beliefs, but I did find that there was actually truth in what I was thinking. Emerson says, nothing at last is sacred but the integrity of your own mind. No law can be sacred to me but that of my own nature. That's a powerful idea. How can we actually be able to adopt that into our own personal lives and realize that that truth that I feel within me is absolute, universal truth? How can I trust myself to discern truth that is coming from within myself? Emerson says, insist on yourself, never imitate. Your own gift you can present every moment with the accumulative force of a whole life's cultivation. But the adopted talent of another, you have only an extemporaneous half possession. So it's what is truly ours to use is that which comes from within us. And what is truly ours to do and be is that which we learn from within. Emerson says, nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. Now, when I read this week, I realized I never really thought of principles in the back in the day the same way that I do now. Religion never taught me about principles. Religion taught me to rely on mysterious forces like God outside myself. Dealing with principles is one of the most valuable aspects of science of mind. It's dealing with logical laws and universal truths. And man, does that make a difference.
Yes, it definitely does. I love that about science of mind too. So I'm going to share a quote with you from Emerson. He wrote, "You will always find those who think they know what is your duty better than you know it. It is easy in the world to live after the world's opinion. It is easy in solitude to live after your own. But the great one is the one who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude." He's talking here about the idea that something within us, whatever you want to call it, is always there, regardless of whether we're in a situation or having an experience or life feels great and happy. It's always there. And the great one is displaying it and feeling it and at least knowing it within. So follow me, if you will, on this train of thought, which will return to this statement and Science of Mind's ideas of this statement. As you know, because I've shared openly and freely, I have a history of abuse. And that abuse has been life transformational. Because of it, I have a great interest in learning more about how we can reveal healing through this teaching to shift the abuse that goes on in our world. So naturally, I have been very interested in following the Jeffrey Epstein case. In my following of that, I learned that one of the spiritual leaders that I thought was so magnificent was a part of some of the Epstein files, Deepak Chopra. That knowledge, since I have told stories from him, shared quotes from him, admired him, led me to further investigation and insights into people and places that I trust. And that led me down a road of realizing that there are and have been many spiritual leaders, many world gurus who have not always been ethical in their leadership, often doing harm to their flock. These kinds of spiritual leaders that we look up to are part of the problem, not part of the solution. Either by being complicit, which means involved with others in wrongdoing, or being complacent, which means guilty of letting something happen, even if they have the power to intervene by stopping it or reporting it, or they simply behaved in a manner completely opposite from the teachings and ideas they are sharing while making lots of money off the people. When I began researching and finding the many people that I had looked up to and respected and quoted and admired among people named in that category, I realized that my heart was pounding, my blood was rushing. I had a physical response to my emotional response from the thoughts that I was having. I felt betrayed by people that I had looked up to and wanted to be like and emulate. Many of these supposed spiritual people I've quoted in my talks and shared stories as they have told them. Right here comes a turning point. And I know this talk could go in many directions at this point. I am choosing to go in the direction with the talk that I am choosing to realize in my own life. That the impact of this knowledge on my physical and emotional well-being and turning it over to that quote from Emerson, in the midst of the crowd, keep with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. Now, this doesn't mean that people shouldn't suffer the consequences of their choice, so please don't hear that in anything that I'm saying. Ernest Holmes tells us that we each suffer the consequences of our own actions and choices. Being our perfect sweetness does mean go first within, as Jesus did. For 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus went off by himself to determine through prayer, through inner work, what was his highest calling. And then he returned to play it out in life. This last Friday, my students were all lined up and we had a little extra time before the bell, so I was engaging them in what they were going to do for the weekend and how much fun they would have with family and friends, and they were excited. And then I said, well, stop for just a minute and close your eyes. And they did. At least I assume they did. I closed mine. And I said, on Monday, you're going to walk back through this door. And when you come through it, you have the opportunity to be even better than you are today. And I said, now open your eyes. I said, every single day when you leave, I ask myself, how could I be a better teacher tomorrow? What could I say or do that would help my students in a better way to learn, to love themselves? And I said, it's not about me thinking I'm a bad teacher or thinking I'm not good enough. It's about realizing that because we're human, we can always do something better. And we each get to decide what that something better is. Maybe you want to do better in PE or better in music or learn something more in math. Maybe you want to change a behavior that wasn't really working for you this week. But the choice is yours. And that same thing is true for us, always. To me, we are taught in Science of Mind and Spirit to be personally responsible for our thoughts, our words, and our actions. We teach to begin where we are because there is nowhere else we can begin. We teach to think in the midst of the crowd that which is the self-givingness of spirit, the perfect sweetness of the God within. This actually means that we are called to be godly. At times when we are dealing with the effects of our human existence, this task of being godly may seem insurmountable. I am here to reassure you it is not. It is entirely possible, and we must provide ourselves with grace along the way. It doesn't have to be a huge not enoughness, not good enough. It can be a simple transformation of the recognition of who we truly are. We must have grace for our humanity. The information that I have been researching had me looking back at the many decisions that I have made, because indeed I am the only one I can change. So it had me looking back at some of the decisions I've made regarding relationships, and I honestly believe that because of who I am today and how I've changed, I would have made different decisions and choices. Therein, we must provide ourselves grace as we maneuver our decisions and learn from them. Today, I find that I attempt to go within and ask myself, what would love do? Stop, quietly go within, and knowing that I am this love. What do I say in this situation? Knowing, without doubt, trusting our own interpretation of that love within us. What action do I take in the situations in my life? We believe the ultimate goal of life to be a complete freedom from all discord of every nature, and that this goal is sure to be attained by all. What better way to do this than to keep with our perfect sweetness? There is a practice we can all participate in to accomplish living our perfect sweetness. It is a process of calling in, not calling out. It begins with taking personal responsibility for the relationships in our life. Not blaming, not shaming, and not guilting others. Not making one party wrong, that other person, so that I can feel right. It means we accept our role in our relationships. And as we take responsibility for our part, we are able to call others in. Call others into a safe space of being able to own their own roles. And everyone gets to look at how a do-over would look. For in our humanity, we each have fallen short of that perfect sweetness. It's okay. Pick it up right where you are and do it differently. Ernest Holmes wrote, "Our time should be devoted to knowing the truth that sets humanity free from the problem of ignorance, that truth which alone can bring enlightenment to the world, that war should cease, that people should live together in harmony because they have recognized the divinity within each other. That same perfect sweetness that resides as you resides in everyone else also. I am calling everyone I know in. Go within yourself to the recognition of that perfect sweetness and then live it outwardly. Then you will be able to see the perfect sweetness in others. And then, and only then, will we live in a world without discord, a world of freedom and perfect sweetness for all." And so it is.